Used to touring the world as a violinist, Itamar Zorman was stuck at home, just like the rest of us during the pandemic in 2020. So he used his instrument as a vehicle for travel. I'm Colleen Phelps. In this look behind the playlist, Zorman tells us about the result, the album, Violin Odyssey. I will admit to loving the title Violin Odyssey for a project in lockdown. Can you talk about if it was born out of your desire for a journey?
um, it's interesting that it somehow came out this way, because usually I travel quite a lot for work, and suddenly I was not able to. It really started from the music, and the journey sort of emerged. I just wanted to use the time, which basically I never had, to just learn a lot of repertoires, mostly, actually exclusively, lesser known pieces that I thought are worth hearing for people. So I started learning those and live streaming them. And then I realized as time was passing that actually geographically they were spanning quite a wide range, really 5 continents. And that turned out to be quite a nice idea for a CD. So I just went with it, and then we recorded it still in lockdown, in fact. So that was an adventure.
Can you talk about what you were missing most from that traveling to perform lifestyle?
Honestly, I didn't miss much because I had time to be with my family, and my daughter was at the time, I think, 2 years old. That was a wonderful time to be with her. I do think that connecting with people through music, that's really the main thing. And the live performances, in that sense, there is a connection that is quite special, and you don't quite feel it through the internet. Or, yeah, so that
I would not necessarily call this album standard repertoire. You definitely didn't go to the standard classical canon. Can you talk about the research you did to put together this collection?
Yes. Well, these days research is a lot easier to do. I assume, way back when, people would need to find scores in libraries, and then try to play things by themselves, mostly to see if they like how it sounds. These days, many things are available through recordings online, so that it was easy in that sense. What I did basically was, there are lots of composers that I happen to love their music, and I learned about their work from different sources. Some I heard friends play, some I even played myself, but sort of different, in a different sort of setting. For example, there's a series in New York. It's called Jupiter Symphony Chamber Players. They sort of specialize in lesser known repertoire. So, for example, the composer Dora Payasovic, I heard one of her pieces there in concert, and then I looked, what does she have for violin, and I found this Slavonic Sonata. So I did this sort of research, and then for the live streams, I brought real experts about this repertoire, people who have written books. There are a couple pieces by Mexican composer Silvestre Revueltas on this album. So I interviewed Roberto Colm Neuhaus from Mexico, who is really probably the world's biggest expert on Revueltas. He is in charge of building up the catalog of all of his works. And in a way, people were much more available and happy to talk, I think, because they didn't have much else to do. They were at home. So that was another part of the research.
I'm glad you brought up Dora Payasovic because that's the next thing I wanted to ask you about. She's one of really the anchors on the album with a large piece in there. Um, Tell us about her.
Yeah, quite a fascinating figure. She lived sort of end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. She died in her late 30s, I think, during childbirth. She was a national hero in a way in Croatia, where she was from. She came from a noble family, but somehow was very much involved with real life, so to speak. So she sort of famously volunteered as nurse during World War One. So in Croatia, she's just known as Dora. There's even like on her gravestone, it just says Dora, and she was an accomplished pianist and violinist. She has lots of work for piano and also a big symphony in F sharp minor. This is sort of her biggest piece. She has two sonatas for violin, very romantic. I like to say that this piece that I'm playing, the Slavonic Sonata, it's, you know, if Dvořák were to live another 10, 20 years, that's what it would have sounded like. So it's very romantic, but it has a slight edge, perhaps 20th century edge, a little bit, I would say.
Dora Payasovic and Erwin Schulhoff were geographically fairly close. They were about a decade apart. The pieces you played were about a decade apart. Can you talk about how different they are, though?
I think worlds apart, really, which is, you know, quite interesting. And you see that somewhat often in that. Well, I guess you can say that's relevant today too. In that first half of the 20th century, you see people going in very, very different directions. So if Dora Payasovic was a little bit more the romantic, sort of traditional way writing, Schulhoff was trying lots and lots of things. The piece that I'm playing here, the Sonata Number Two, which I think is a phenomenal piece of music. It has some jazz elements. He was very, very much interested in that. There are some quotes of him saying how he just liked to go to jazz clubs and dance, and he somehow the physical sensation of the music meant a lot to him. So there's some jazz in it, but also this sort of expressionism, very, very strong, expressive writing. That's mainly in the second movement, and also this kind of hard folk sense. Sometimes this kind of very brisk rhythms, somewhat forceful at times. It's yeah, wonderful piece of music, and again, I like very much the pairing with the Payasovic. Just the differences within a short time span are quite interesting.
2020 was when a lot of artists really rethought their focus, with so many things sort of coming to a head at once. And what they were saying with this platform of music making. Now that you've released this album from that time, can you talk about sort of how the message you send in your music has evolved?
That's an interesting question. I do find that there is more openness to different sorts of repertoire coming, perhaps from different cultures, which is very positive. There is a lot of there really is a lot of repertoire out there that's not so well known, and I think it deserves a hearing, even just for curiosity's sake. And I'm glad that people are generally more curious now about different repertoire. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. I do find that in live performances, somehow the importance of this experience of hearing music live in a community, somehow the the importance of it has strengthened, I find, with many audience members. That's been my experience. It's meaningful for them, and it is for me too. So I would say these two things: the repertoire and the expansion, musically and culturally, and also the significance of the meaningfulness of making music together.
You mentioned being home with your 2-year-old during that time and how special that was. Did that have an effect on what you put into the album?
Yes, it did. I did also some during lockdown. I did some little broadcasts for kids, like playing actual kids songs, which was fun. Just for people, I live in Athens, Georgia, so like for the community there, I did some things. But I added one piece to this album, which I happen to really love quite dearly. It's a children's suite by a composer called Joseph Afron. Afron, originally from Russia, immigrated to the US, I think in the 1920s, maybe 30s. He's most well known for somehow incorporating traditional Eastern European Jewish elements into his music, and this piece actually has some of that too. They're very short, 1-2 minute long, little pictures of childhood. I would say scenes from childhood as bubbles, birds in the window, a top spinning, parade with presents, things like that. They're really quite charming, and they all have little elements from cantillation, from traditional singing. And in a way, I feel quite connected to that. It's a wonderful piece of music.
You talked about audiences becoming more curious in this time and how that sort of allows you to look into new repertoire. Do you feel like it's made you more curious as well?
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yes. And I must say that even listening to colleagues playing works by composers that I didn't know before is absolutely, expanded my horizons. And I've become familiar with pieces that I didn't know of, that I absolutely love. For example, this is not even a piece for violin. I mentioned Revueltas before, the Mexican composer. He has piece was originally a movie score, but it's called La Noche de los Mayas, the Night of the Mayas, I guess. A big orchestra. At some point, I knew very little of the composer before, and now this is something I just listened for fun. I love the piece very much. Same with William Grant Still. I recorded Summerland, but for example, the suite for violin and piano, 3 movements that are inspired by African American visual artists from the 30s. It's wonderful music, and I'm so glad that finally people are hearing it. And it's also, I think, reshaping a little bit how we think of 20th century music. This is a trend that's been going on for some time, looking for things that are not necessarily as avant-garde, that were written during the 20th century. I guess Schulhoff somewhat fits this category too, and other composers actually on this CD probably, but William Grant Still is a very good example of that. Kind of slightly more traditional, although with a very unique, both personal and also cultural perspective. Yeah.
You can listen to Violin Odyssey wherever you get music, and you can also hear it on 90.5 WUOL Classical Louisville.